You're joining us from outside the Ten Boom Museum in front of the watch shop. For 3 generations, the Ten Boom family were watchmakers. What you'll hear about in this video is one of the instrumental people, Corrie ten Boom. She was actually one of the first clockmakers in Holland as a registered clockmaker as a woman. This family, the Ten Boom family, helped many people. They were not wealthy, but they were able to help many people because they had their own business, this watch shop, which also served as a front for the resistance against Nazi Germany during the Second World War. During the occupation, many people were in this house, like I said, so people sat and they ate at this table together. But if there was an emergency, everyone had to act as if there was only 3 people living in the house, and at times, like I said, there were more than 10 people in the house eating the beds. So what would have to be done is all the plates and everything would need to be cleaned up quickly. It would have to look like only 3 people had eaten here. Upstairs, when you went into the bedrooms, beds are warm if people sleep on them, so what they would do raids or drills in the middle of the night. They would have to turn over their beds and do certain things with their bedding to make it seem like no one had slept in those beds, because technically only 3 people were supposed to be in the house. The Ten Boom family were known for generations as watchmakers. On this other side you'll end up seeing a watch shop soon. But this sign for Alpina clocks was used as a signal, and it was placed here in the window as a sign. If this was in the window, it meant that it was safe for the people working within the resistance to come and see what was happening. So what happened was, when the people invaded or came into the house, the Ten Boom family was arrested, but what happened was her sister, Betsy, had taken the sign out and let it drop on the ground. The Nazi Gestapo person, he saw that she had done that, and what he did is he picked up the sign and put it back in the window, and up to 20 people were arrested that day because he had put the sign back in the window, and that was what they thought was safe, and it wasn't safe anymore. Welcome to the living room of the Ten Boom house. This is where, during the occupation, the Ten Boom family, they entertained people. They had sometimes 20 people, sometimes more than that in this house, feeding and taking care of Jewish families that were in hiding, people as part of the resistance. As much as it was a very heavy time, the Ten Booms, they wanted to bring joy and gladness to people. So on this piano, they would play songs and they would sing together in the evenings. They were also hiding at that time a Jewish cantor, that's a singer in a synagogue. And so when they would sing songs together, he would sing very boisterously and happy. And the neighbors would come over and they would get so upset and they would say, "Please tell him to be quiet. Everyone can hear you guys singing and they're going to find out about you." But that didn't stop them. In the midst of their hard times, they knew that they needed to be joyful and just have some sense of feeling like a human in the midst of a time where the Nazis tried their best to dehumanize others. The woman that we were talking about that was instrumental in this is Corrie ten Boom. This is her picture here. She lives here with her family, her mother, who died before the war even happened, but with her sister and her father. Before the period of the war, her family was very active in the community. They did a lot of social things, from Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts, taking care of handicapped, taking care of widows and orphans, feeding the hungry. They were a very involved family. One thing that this family had done, though, for many generations, actually 100 years before the war, is they decided that they were going to pray for the Jewish people, that they as a family would love them and take care of them. And that was very unique for that time. Corrie's nephew was a theologian, and when he was studying at a university, he wrote his end thesis about anti-Semitism in Germany and in France. And that was very controversial back then, and he himself became a preacher, and he would tell people in Holland, be careful, there's anti-Semitism creeping up. And if we are Christians and if we are people that know the Bible, then we need to be cautious of this, because they want to exterminate the Jews. They want to get rid of them. And he was a very strong voice against that. And Corrie and her family were also very adamant about the fact that Jewish people were not to be discriminated against by others. If you want to come with me, this story centers around the family called the Ten Boom family, and one of the main people who wrote the book, The Hiding Place, her name is Corrie ten Boom. When this whole event happened with the occupation of the Germans and hiding the Nazis, this woman was well into her 50s. She and her older sister and her father, who was 84, helped hide people in this home. They risked their lives to help the Jewish people. They cared for them, they loved them, they believed in them, and their house was always open. If it wasn't for the Ten Boom family, many, many people would have lost their lives. Corrie, after the war was open, began to write her story and many other stories. She was a very religious Christian woman who wrote many inspirational Christian books. And she traveled all around the world as a speaker in prisons and countries where people are persecuted for beliefs, telling people about love, telling people about forgiveness and restoration of life. And she was a very, very special person. Of Amsterdam, a lot of the Jewish people that had lived in the Netherlands were quartered together in certain neighborhoods and had to live in a ghetto. If you see how they were treated, they were forced to line up in the ground. They were caged like animals into trains, and most of them, obviously all of them, had to wear the Star of David to identify themselves. It was a very tragic story, and eventually most of them were sent to Westerbork. That's the closest concentration camp to this area. If you kind of come with me this way, when the war was finally over, it was actually one of the harshest winters that were known in this country. So agencies just like the Red Cross dropped packets with biscuits and things to help people eat, but it was so cold when the biscuits and everything finally came, they were as hard as rocks, and people really couldn't eat. The people were so desperate and hungry for food that they actually had to dig up tulip bulbs and eat them in order to find some form of nourishment. It was very hard in Holland. During the war, people had to have ration cards. Every person was accounted for legally. Obviously, when people wanted to hide people, they had to work with an underground network. The underground network would provide fake ration cards, fake identity cards. It was explained earlier, but I'll tell you, most Jewish people, the men, for religious reasons, wore beards. Those beards were shaved off. Jewish women are known for having dark hair. The women were taken in this house in order to hide them and brought into the basement, and their hair was dyed blonde with peroxide. And because of those simple things, many of their lives were spared. Men during that time were also dressed like women in order to work for the resistance, and Jewish men, because the Nazis believed that women, they couldn't help anyone, they were helpless. So that was a way that men were able to be couriers and to deliver things and to help people and to hide people, because the Nazis never suspected that women or people dressed as women would be working for the underground. Hey everyone, we're joining you from the Corrie ten Boom house in Haarlem. This over here behind me is a secret hiding place that was used to hide Jews during the Second World War. During the time of the German occupation, this house was raided, and 4 Jewish people and 2 Dutch young men that were part of the resistance hid in this wall for a period of 2 days while the house was being guarded by the Gestapo. 2 days of standing in the wall, very limited space, no water, nothing to eat. After 2 days, they were relieved by double agents that were working for the Dutch Queen, who finally released them. During the raids, when the Nazis finally came, the people actually had to run up here because this hole obviously was a regular wall, and they would go through here in the closet. That door would fall down, they would put boxes in front, and they would close the door. And this wall was obviously sealed off, made from brick that was smuggled in, and that is how 4 Jews and 2 German people with the resistance lives were saved.